In a house filled with secrets and silence, a man who had everything chose to belittle and betray the woman who had always stood by his side after she fell ill. Mason Vance believed he was in control, but what he didn't know was that behind Grace's apparent frailty, a dark truth was about to surface. Mysterious medications, hidden documents, and a betrayal so cruel that no one would dare to imagine. What began as an act of contempt turns into a dangerous game where love, ambition, and justice collide without mercy. Stay until the end, because this story will grip you from start to finish and leave you speechless. The golden light of a late autumn afternoon filtered through the expansive windows of Grace Whitmore's design studio in downtown Aurora, Colorado. At 45, Grace stood before a mood board, her slender fingers tracing the edges of fabric swatches and color palettes. Her honey blonde hair, streaked with subtle highlights, was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, revealing the determined set of her jaw and the spark of creativity in her hazel eyes. "What do you think, Jen?" Grace asked, turning to her assistant. "The Hendersons want something bold but not brash for their lake house renovation." Jennifer Chen, a recent graduate from the Colorado School of Art and Design, stepped closer to examine the board. "I love the contrast between the deep blues and the warm woods. It's like bringing the lake inside without being too on the nose." Grace nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Exactly. We'll present this concept to them next week. Can you prepare the digital mock-ups?" As Jennifer headed to her desk, Grace's phone buzzed. A text from her husband, Mason Vance, lit up the screen. "Board meeting ran late. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you." A small sigh escaped her lips. It wasn't unusual for Mason to work late, especially since taking over as CEO of Vance Enterprises, the family-owned real estate development firm. Still, a nagging feeling tugged at the back of her mind. Lately, these late nights seemed more frequent, the distance between them growing incrementally with each passing week. Grace shook off the feeling, focusing instead on the success that surrounded her. Whitmore Interiors had become one of the most sought-after design firms in the Denver metropolitan area. From sleek urban lofts to sprawling mountain retreats, Grace's keen eye and innovative approach had earned her a reputation for transforming spaces into personalized works of art. As she gathered her things to leave for the day, Grace caught a glimpse of her reflection in the studio's glass doors. She looked every bit the successful businesswoman, tailored blazer, pencil skirt, and the confident posture of someone who had built something meaningful from the ground up. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, a whisper of uncertainty lingered. The drive home to their Saddle Rock Ridge neighborhood was a blur of familiar streets and fading daylight. Grace pulled into the driveway of the stunning contemporary home she and Mason had built together 5 years ago. It was a testament to their combined talents, his vision for property development and her flair for design. Inside, the house was quiet, save for the soft padding of paws as their golden retriever, Buddy, came to greet her. Grace knelt to ruffle his ears, finding comfort in his unconditional affection. "At least someone's always happy to see me," she murmured, a hint of melancholy coloring her words. As she moved through the house, turning on lights and shedding the armor of her workday, Grace's mind wandered to the early days of her relationship with Mason. They had met at a charity gala 12 years ago. She, an up-and-coming designer, and he, the charismatic heir to the Vance real estate empire. Their whirlwind romance had been the talk of Aurora's social circle, culminating in a fairy tale wedding at the iconic Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. For years they had been the perfect power couple. Mason's business acumen complemented Grace's artistic talents, and together they seemed unstoppable. But lately, something had shifted. Grace couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a growing sense of unease, a feeling that the solid ground beneath their marriage was not as stable as it once seemed. Grace poured herself a glass of Cabernet and stepped out onto the back patio. The sun was setting over the distant Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange that would have inspired her latest design project. But tonight, the beauty was lost on her as she grappled with a gnawing sense of isolation. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her best friend Astrid Monroe. "Drinks tomorrow? I've got juicy gossip, and you look like you could use a night out." A smile tugged at Grace's lips. Astrid had been her confidant since college, a constant source of support and laughter through life's ups and downs. "You're a mind reader," Grace typed back. "Usual spot at 7? With plans set for the following evening, Grace felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. She needed a friendly ear, someone to help her sort through the jumble of emotions she'd been experiencing lately. As she prepared a simple dinner for one, Grace's mind drifted to the moment everything in her life had begun to change. It had started with a stumble, quite literally. She had been rushing to a client meeting when her legs suddenly gave out, sending her sprawling onto the sidewalk. At first, she'd brushed it off as clumsiness, a result of her perpetually hectic schedule, but when the weakness persisted, accompanied by unexplained fatigue and difficulty swallowing, she knew something was wrong. The diagnosis had come like a thunderbolt on a clear day: myasthenia gravis. The neurologist had explained it was a rare autoimmune disorder that caused muscle weakness and fatigue. Grace remembered sitting in the sterile exam room, her mind reeling as the doctor outlined treatment options and lifestyle changes. Mason had been there, holding her hand, his face a mask of concern and determination. "We'll fight this together," he had promised, his voice steady and reassuring. "Whatever it takes, we'll get through this." In those early days after the diagnosis, Mason had been attentive, even overprotective. He insisted on driving her to appointments, pored over medical journals, and reached out to specialists across the country. Grace had been touched by his devotion, grateful for his strength as she navigated the uncertain waters of her new reality. But as the weeks turned into months, something began to change. Mason's concern slowly morphed into something else, a subtle shift in the power dynamic of their relationship. He began making decisions for her, insisting she cut back on work hours, questioning her ability to manage client meetings or site visits. "I'm just looking out for you," he would say, his tone a mixture of care and condescension that left Grace feeling both loved and diminished. Grace sank onto the plush sofa in their living room, absently stroking Buddy's head as he laid it on her lap. She stared at the large abstract painting on the wall opposite, a wedding gift from Mason, a piece she had once adored for its bold strokes and vibrant energy. Now it seemed to mock her with its exuberance, a reminder of a time when everything in her life felt vivid and full of possibility. The sound of a car in the driveway stirred her from her reverie. Moments later, Mason walked through the door, his tall frame filling the entryway. At 48, he was still strikingly handsome, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege and success. "Hey, beautiful," he said, crossing the room to plant a kiss on her forehead. "Sorry I'm so late. The Riverside project is giving us some zoning issues." Grace nodded, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's okay, I understand." Mason loosened his tie and sank into the armchair across from her. "How was your day? Not overdoing it, I hope." There it was again, that note of concern tinged with something else, something that made Grace feel like a child being checked up on rather than an equal partner. "It was fine," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "We're finalizing the concept for the Henderson Lake House." Mason nodded, but Grace could see his attention was already drifting. He pulled out his phone, thumbs flying over the screen as he responded to what was undoubtedly another work email. "That's great, honey," he said absently. "Listen, I was thinking, maybe it's time to consider bringing on a partner for Whitmore Interiors. Someone who could take on some of the day-to-day management, ease your workload a bit." Grace felt a flicker of annoyance. "I don't need a partner, Mason. The business is doing well, and I'm managing just fine." He looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "I'm just trying to help, Grace. With your condition, it's important not to push yourself too hard." "My condition doesn't define me," Grace said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I'm still capable of running my own company." Mason held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Of course you are. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I just worry about you, that's all." The conversation lapsed into an uncomfortable silence, filled only by the soft whir of the central heating and Buddy's contented sighs. Grace felt the familiar weight of unspoken words and growing distance settling between them like an unwelcome guest. As Mason excused himself to take a shower, Grace found herself staring at the phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over Astrid's contact information. She needed to talk to someone who would listen without judgment, someone who could help her make sense of the conflicting emotions swirling inside her. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would confide in Astrid, and maybe then she could begin to unravel the knot of uncertainty that had taken root in her heart. For now she would put on a brave face and navigate another evening in this beautiful home that increasingly felt like a gilded cage. As she prepared for bed that night, Grace caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at her looked tired, yes, but there was still a fire in her eyes, a determination that spoke of inner strength and resilience. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Grace Whitmore was not a woman who would go down without a fight. Little did she know, the true battle was only just beginning. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, a typical autumn day in Aurora. Grace awoke before her alarm, her body stiff and uncooperative. She lay still for a moment, willing her muscles to respond, fighting against the heaviness that seemed to press down on her limbs. This had become her daily ritual, a quiet battle against her own body before facing the world. As she slowly sat up, Grace caught sight of Mason's empty side of the bed. The sound of the shower running told her he was already preparing for another busy day at Vance Enterprises. She sighed, remembering a time when mornings were filled with shared coffee and conversation. Now it felt like they were two ships passing in the night, their trajectories growing further apart with each passing day. Grace made her way to the bathroom, each step a conscious effort. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the slight droop in her left eyelid, another symptom of the myasthenia gravis that had become more pronounced lately. She reached for her medication, a colorful array of pills that had become as much a part of her morning routine as brushing her teeth. As she swallowed the pills, a nagging thought crept into her mind. Shouldn't she be feeling better by now? Dr. Patel had adjusted her dosage last month, promising improved symptom management, but if anything, Grace felt worse. The fatigue was more persistent, the muscle weakness more pronounced. She made a mental note to call the doctor's office later that day. Downstairs, Mason was already at the kitchen island, scrolling through his tablet while sipping coffee. He looked up as Grace entered, his expression a mixture of concern and something else, something that made Grace feel like she was being assessed rather than greeted. "Morning, honey," he said, rising to pour her a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling today?" Grace accepted the mug with a small smile. "I'm okay. A bit tired, but that's nothing new." Mason frowned, placing a hand on her forehead as if checking for a fever. "Maybe you should take the day off, rest up a bit." Grace bristled at the suggestion, stepping back from his touch. "I have a client meeting this afternoon. I can't just cancel every time I feel a little off." "I'm sure Jennifer can handle it," Mason pressed. "The client would understand if you explained." "I don't need to explain anything," Grace interrupted, her voice sharp. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own schedule, Mason." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Mason's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he gathered his things and headed for the door. "I've got an early meeting. Don't forget, we have dinner with the Blakes tonight. I'll pick you up at 7. Before Grace could protest or remind him of her plans with Astrid, Mason was gone, leaving her alone in the suddenly too quiet kitchen. The day passed in a blur of fabric swatches, client calls, and the constant low-grade fatigue that had become Grace's unwelcome companion. By late afternoon, she found herself looking forward to her evening out with Astrid more than ever. She needed a friendly ear, someone who would listen without trying to manage her life. At precisely 7 o'clock, Astrid's cherry-red convertible pulled up in front of Barolo Grill, their favorite Italian restaurant in Cherry Creek. Grace climbed in, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders as she settled into the passenger seat. "Well, don't you look like you need a drink and a shoulder to cry on?" Astrid quipped, her blue eyes twinkling with a mixture of humor and concern. Grace laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "Is it that obvious? Honey, I've known you for 20 years. You're an open book to me," Astrid replied, pulling back into traffic. "Now spill. What's going on with you and Mr. Tall, dark and controlling?" Over plates of homemade pasta and glasses of robust Chianti, Grace poured out her heart. She told Astrid about the increasing tension with Mason, his attempts to micromanage her life, and her growing sense of isolation. "I feel like I'm disappearing," Grace confessed, twirling pasta around her fork without eating it. "It's like the more my body fails me, the more Mason tries to take over every aspect of my life. I know he means well, but good intentions don't excuse controlling behavior," Astrid finished for her, reaching across the table to squeeze Grace's hand. "Have you talked to him about how you're feeling?" Grace shook her head. "Every time I try, he turns it around. Suddenly I'm being unreasonable or pushing myself too hard. I don't know how to make him understand that his help is suffocating me." Astrid's expression grew serious. "Grace, honey, I hate to ask this, but are you sure it's just concern driving Mason's behavior? Could there be something else going on?" Grace felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Well, Astrid hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It's just that, from what you're telling me, it sounds like Mason's using your condition to exert more control, not just over you, but over the business too. Has he been making any changes at Vance Enterprises that seem odd to you? The question hit Grace like a bucket of cold water. She thought about the late-night phone calls, the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the increasing secrecy around the company's finances. A knot formed in her stomach as pieces began to fall into place. Now that you mention it, Grace said slowly, there have been some strange things happening at the company. New hires I've never met, projects that seem to materialize out of nowhere. And there's this new assistant of his, Marcella Langley. She's always hovering, always whispering in Mason's ear. Astrid's eyebrows shot up. Marcella Langley? As in, the former model-turned-business consultant? Grace, honey, I hate to break it to you, but that woman has a reputation, and it's not for her business acumen, if you know what I mean. Grace felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of embarrassment and anger rising within her. Are you suggesting that Mason and Marcella... Astrid held up her hands. I'm not suggesting anything definite, but I think you need to start asking some serious questions, Grace, and maybe it's time to get some outside help. Outside help? Grace echoed, her mind reeling. I know a guy, Astrid said, her voice lowering conspiratorially. Lucian Hawthorne. He's a lawyer, specializes in corporate law and, let's say, discreet investigations. If there's something fishy going on with Mason and the company, Lucian can find out. Grace's first instinct was to protest. The idea of investigating her own husband felt wrong, a betrayal of the trust they'd built over years of marriage. But as she opened her mouth to refuse, she thought about Mason's increasingly erratic behavior, the growing distance between them, and the nagging feeling that something was very, very wrong. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Give me his number. The next morning, Grace sat in her home office, staring at the business card Astrid had given her. Lucian Hawthorne, attorney at law. Her finger hovered over the phone, doubt and determination warring within her. Before she could second-guess herself, Grace dialed the number. A deep, assured voice answered on the second ring. Lucian Hawthorne speaking. Mr. Hawthorne, Grace began, her voice steadier than she felt. My name is Grace Whitmore. I was given your number by a mutual friend, Astrid Monroe. I think I may need your help. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Whitmore, I've heard a great deal about you from Astrid. Why don't you come to my office this afternoon? We can discuss your situation in private. 2 hours later, Grace found herself in a sleek, modern office in downtown Denver. Lucian Hawthorne was not what she had expected. In his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and piercing green eyes, he exuded an air of quiet competence that immediately put Grace at ease. As she outlined her concerns, Mason's controlling behavior, the strange happenings at Vance Enterprises, her suspicions about Marcella Langley, Lucian listened intently, his expression grave. Mrs. Whitmore, he said when she had finished, based on what you've told me, I believe there is cause for concern. If you're willing, I'd like to begin a discreet investigation into Vance Enterprises' recent activities. We'll need to tread carefully. Your husband's position makes this a delicate situation. Grace nodded, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. What do you need from me? For now, I need you to act as normally as possible, Lucian advised. Don't let on that you suspect anything. In the meantime, I'll begin looking into the company's financial records and recent hires. And, Mrs. Whitmore, keep a close eye on your personal accounts and any joint assets you have with your husband. If there is malfeasance occurring, we need to protect your interests. As Grace left Lucian's office, she felt as though she had stepped into an alternate reality. Was she really investigating her own husband? The man she had loved and trusted for over a decade? Over the next few weeks, Grace found herself living a double life. On the surface, she maintained the facade of the supportive wife and successful businesswoman. She attended charity galas on Mason's arm, smiled for photographs, and continued to run Whitmore Interiors with her usual flair. But beneath the polished exterior, Grace was a maelstrom of emotions. Every interaction with Mason now felt loaded with hidden meaning. She found herself analyzing his every word, every gesture, looking for clues to confirm or deny her suspicions. Her physical condition didn't improve either. Despite faithfully taking her medication, Grace found her symptoms worsening. The fatigue was crushing, and there were days when even the simplest tasks felt like climbing Mount Everest. Yet, when she mentioned it to Mason, his response was always the same. A mixture of concern and dismissiveness that left her feeling both coddled and ignored. It was during one of her follow-up appointments with Dr. Patel that Grace's suspicions about her health took a new frightening turn. As the neurologist reviewed her latest test results, a frown creased his forehead. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his tone cautious, "these results are unexpected. Given the dosage of your current medication, we should be seeing more improvement in your symptoms. Instead, it appears that your condition is deteriorating more rapidly than anticipated." Grace felt her heart rate quicken. "What does that mean, Doctor?" "Patel, is the medication not working?" The doctor removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's possible that you're not responding to the treatment as we hoped, but..." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There's also a possibility that there's an issue with the medication itself. Have you been taking it exactly as prescribed?" "Of course," Grace replied, a chill running down her spine. "Mason, my husband, he's been very insistent about making sure I take my pills on schedule." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "I see. Mrs. Whitmore, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to run a few additional tests. And if you're amenable, I'd like to provide you with a new prescription, one that I'll ask you to fill at a different pharmacy and keep to yourself for now. Let's see if there's any change in your condition over the next few weeks." As Grace left the doctor's office, her mind was reeling. Was it possible? Could Mason be tampering with her medication? The thought was so horrifying, so at odds with the man she thought she knew, that she could barely bring herself to consider it. That evening, as she sat across from Mason at the dinner table, Grace found herself studying him with new eyes. He was talking animatedly about a new development project, his handsome face alight with enthusiasm. How could this be the same man she now suspected of such betrayal? "Oh, by the way," Mason said, interrupting her thoughts, "I've invited Marcella to join us for dinner tomorrow night. I think it's time you two got to know each other better. She's been an invaluable asset to the company." Grace felt her stomach lurch. "Marcella, I didn't realize you two had become so close." Mason's expression flickered for a moment. Was it guilt? Annoyance? Before settling back into a neutral smile. "She's just a colleague, Grace. An important one, yes, but nothing more. I thought you'd be happy I'm including you in the business side of things more." Grace forced a smile, even as her mind raced. "Of course. I look forward to it." Later that night, as Mason slept soundly beside her, Grace lay awake, her thoughts a tumultuous whirlwind. She thought about the life she had built, the dreams she had shared with Mason, and the uncertain future that now loomed before her. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and typed out a message to Lucian Hawthorne. "We need to talk. I think it's worse than we thought." As she hit send, Grace felt a strange mix of fear and determination settle over her. Whatever was happening, whatever Mason was involved in, she would get to the bottom of it. She had spent too long being the docile, trusting wife. It was time to fight. For her health, for her company, and for the truth. Little did Grace know, the dinner with Marcella Langley would be the catalyst for a series of events that would shake the very foundations of her world. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the pieces of a complex puzzle were already beginning to fall into place. A puzzle that would reveal a web of deceit, betrayal and danger, far beyond anything she had imagined. The evening of the dinner with Marcella Langley arrived, and Grace found herself standing before her closet, hands trembling slightly as she selected her outfit. She chose a deep burgundy wrap dress that accentuated her still elegant figure, a silent reminder to herself of the strength and beauty she possessed, despite the toll her illness had taken. As she applied her makeup, Grace caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her seemed different somehow. There was a glint of determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just Mason Vance's wife or the woman battling myasthenia gravis. She was a fighter, preparing for battle. The doorbell chimed at precisely 7 o'clock. Grace took a deep breath, steeling herself for the evening ahead. As she descended the stairs, she heard Mason's deep laugh mingling with a lighter, feminine chuckle. The sound sent a chill down her spine. Marcella Langley was everything Grace had feared and more. Tall, willowy, with cascading dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, She exuded an aura of confidence that bordered on arrogance. As Grace entered the room, Marcella's gaze swept over her, assessing and dismissive all at once. "Ah, there you are, darling," Mason said, crossing the room to plant a kiss on Grace's cheek. "Marcella, this is my wife, Grace. Grace, Marcella Langley." Marcella extended a perfectly manicured hand, her grip firm and cool. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Grace. Mason speaks of you often." "All good things, I hope," Grace replied, forcing a smile. She couldn't help but notice the familiar way Marcella said Mason's name, the slight emphasis that spoke of an intimacy beyond mere colleagues. As they moved to the dining room, Grace felt as though she were watching a carefully choreographed dance. Mason and Marcella moved in sync, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed business deals and mutual acquaintances. Grace found herself on the outside, struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire exchange of inside jokes and industry jargon. It was during the main course that the first bombshell dropped. Mason, his cheeks flushed with wine and excitement, turned to Grace with a broad smile. "I've been meaning to tell you, sweetheart. We've just closed a deal on a huge development project in Singapore. It's going to take Vance Enterprises global." Grace's fork clattered against her plate. "Singapore? But when did this happen? You never mentioned anything about expanding internationally." Mason waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, it's all happened rather quickly. Marcella's contacts in Asia were instrumental in making it happen. We had to move fast to beat out the competition." Marcella leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "It's an incredible opportunity, Grace. The potential returns are, well, let's just say it could change everything for Vance Enterprises." As the two of them launched into a detailed discussion of the project, Grace felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just a new development deal. This was a fundamental shift in the company's direction, one that had apparently been made without any input from her. Later that night, after Marcella had left and Mason had retired to his study for a late-night conference call, Grace sat alone in the darkened living room. Her mind was racing, piecing together fragments of conversations and half-remembered details from the past few months. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed Lucian Hawthorne's number. Despite the late hour, he answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Whitmore? Is everything all right?" Grace took a deep breath. "Mr. Hawthorne, Lucian, I need your help. I think Mason is doing something illegal, and I need to know what it is." The next morning found Grace in Lucian's office, recounting the details of the previous night's dinner and her growing suspicions about Mason's business dealings. Lucian listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "A sudden expansion into Singapore is certainly unusual," he mused, "especially for a company that's primarily focused on local real estate development. Mrs. Whitmore, with your permission, I'd like to dig deeper into Vance Enterprises' financial records. If there's something amiss, that's where we'll find it." Grace nodded, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through her. "Do whatever you need to do, Lucian. I need to know the truth." Over the next few weeks, Grace found herself living a double life. By day, she maintained the facade of the supportive wife and successful businesswoman. She attended charity galas on Mason's arm, smiled for photographs, and continued to run Whitmore Interiors with her usual flair. But in secret, she was working tirelessly with Lucian to uncover the truth about Mason's activities. Late-night phone calls, clandestine meetings in out-of-the-way cafes, and hours spent poring over financial documents became her new normal. It was during one of these late-night sessions in Lucian's office that they made their first major breakthrough. Lucian burst into the room, his usually composed demeanor shattered by excitement and disbelief. "Grace," he said, forgetting formalities in his haste, "you need to see this." He spread a series of documents across his desk. Grace leaned in, her eyes widening as she took in the complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and questionable transactions. "What am I looking at, Lucian?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian's expression was grim. "It appears that Mason has been siphoning funds from Vance Enterprises into a series of shell companies. The money is then being funneled into high-risk investments in Southeast Asia, including the Singapore project he mentioned." Grace felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. "But why? Mason's always been so conservative with the company's finances. Why would he take such risks?" Lucian hesitated, his eyes meeting Grace's with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "There's more, Grace. We've uncovered evidence of large payments being made to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, accounts that appear to be jointly held by Mason and Marcella Langley. The revelation hit Grace like a physical blow. She stumbled back, sinking into a nearby chair as the full implications of what Lucien was saying washed over her. Not only was Mason embezzling from the company, but he was doing it in collusion with Marcella. As she struggled to process this information, Lucien gently placed another document before her. "There's one more thing you need to see, Grace. It's a life insurance policy, taken out on you with Mason as the sole beneficiary. The payout is substantial, far more than one would expect for a standard policy." Grace felt the room spin around her. The medication, her worsening symptoms, Mason's increasing control over her life, suddenly it all made a horrifying kind of sense. "He's trying to kill me," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and impossible even as she said them. "My own husband is trying to kill me." Lucien knelt beside her, his hand resting comfortingly on her arm. "We don't know that for certain, Grace, but given everything we've uncovered, we need to take this very seriously. You're not safe in that house anymore." Grace nodded numbly, her mind reeling from the enormity of the betrayal she had uncovered. As the shock began to wear off, however, a new emotion took its place. Anger, white-hot, righteous fury coursed through her veins. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Lucien's expression was resolute. "Now we gather more evidence, we build an airtight case, and then, Grace, we take them down. All of them." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Grace threw herself into the investigation with a fervor that surprised even Lucien. She combed through years of financial records, reached out to old business contacts for information, and even installed a discreet camera in Mason's home office. As they worked together, Grace found herself growing closer to Lucien. His steady presence and unwavering support became a lifeline in the storm of betrayal and deceit that her life had become. There were moments, late at night as they pored over documents, when their eyes would meet and Grace would feel a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her condition. But even as they made progress in their investigation, the danger around Grace grew. Mason's behavior became increasingly erratic. He alternated between periods of smothering attentiveness and cold distance. Grace found herself second-guessing every meal, every drink, wondering if this would be the time he finally succeeded in poisoning her. The turning point came on a rain-soaked night in late November. Grace had stayed late at Whitmore Interiors, using the quiet of the empty office to go through some files she had borrowed from Mason's study. As she was preparing to leave, she heard the ping of the elevator arriving on her floor. Panic seized her. No one else should be here at this hour. She quickly gathered the documents, shoving them into her bag as she looked for a place to hide. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing closer with each passing second. Just as she ducked behind a large display board, the door to her office swung open. Through a small gap, Grace could see Mason enter, followed closely by Marcella. "Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Marcella was saying, her voice low and urgent. Mason scoffed. "Grace, please." She's too caught up in her own health problems to notice what's going on around her. By the time she realizes anything is wrong, it'll be too late. Grace held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they would hear it. She watched as Mason crossed to her desk, rifling through the drawers as if searching for something. "It's not here," he muttered. "Damn it, where could she have put it?" Marcella placed a hand on his arm, her touch lingering in a way that made Grace's stomach churn. "Relax, darling. Even if she has seen something, who's going to believe her? A sick woman, possibly confused by her medication?" "We've covered our tracks well." Mason nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "I just want this over with. The sooner we can move forward with our plans, the better." As they turned to leave, Marcella paused, her gaze sweeping the office one last time. For a heart-stopping moment, Grace thought she had been discovered. But then Marcella turned away, following Mason out of the room. Grace remained frozen in her hiding spot, long after the sound of their footsteps had faded. Her mind was reeling from what she had just witnessed. It was one thing to suspect betrayal, to uncover evidence of financial misdeeds. It was another thing entirely to hear her husband casually discussing her demise with his mistress. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and dialed Lucien's number. When he answered, she could barely form the words through her tears. "Lucien," she choked out, "I need you. Please, I can't do this alone anymore." Lucian's voice was steady, an anchor in the storm of her emotions. "I'm on my way, Grace. Just hold on. You're not alone in this. We'll face it together." As she ended the call, Grace felt a strange calm settle over her. The time for doubt and hesitation was over. Mason and Marcella had made their move, and now it was her turn to strike back. Standing up from her hiding place, Grace moved to the window, looking out over the twinkling lights of Aurora. The city she had called home for so long suddenly felt alien and dangerous. But as she watched the headlights of Lucian's car pull into the parking lot below, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. This was far from over. Mason, Marcella, and anyone else involved in their scheme were about to learn a painful lesson. They had gravely underestimated Grace Whitmore, and she was ready to show them just how costly that mistake would be. As Lucian entered the office, his face etched with concern, Grace turned to him with newfound resolve. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "It's time to take back what's mine." Little did Grace know, this moment of decision would set in motion a chain of events that would not only expose the truth, but also test her in ways she never thought possible. The battle for her life, her company, and her future was about to begin in earnest. Lucian's eyes widened as Grace recounted what she had overheard. His jaw clenched, a mixture of anger and determination flashing across his face. "This changes everything," he said, pacing the office. "We need to move our timeline up. They're clearly planning something and we can't afford to wait." Grace nodded, her mind racing. "What's our next move?" Lucian pulled out his phone, quickly tapping out a message. "I'm contacting a friend at the FBI. With what we've uncovered about the offshore accounts and now this, it's time to bring in the authorities." As Lucian made his calls, Grace found herself drawn to the window again. The city lights blurred as tears filled her eyes. How had it come to this? The life she had built, the love she thought she shared with Mason, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed facade hiding a heart of darkness. But amidst the pain and betrayal, Grace felt something else stirring within her, a fierce determination. She had built Whitmore Interiors from the ground up. She had faced a devastating diagnosis and refused to let it define her. She was not about to let Mason and Marcella destroy everything she had worked for. "Grace," Lucian's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "My contact at the FBI wants to meet. They're taking this very seriously, especially given Mason's prominence in the business community. But they need more concrete evidence." Grace turned to face him, her expression resolute. "Then we'll get it for them. Tell me what we need to do." Over the next few days, Grace threw herself into gathering evidence with a fervor that surprised even Lucian. She combed through years of financial records, cross-referencing transactions and piecing together the complex web of Mason's illegal activities. Working closely with Lucian, she began to see patterns emerging. The Singapore deal was just the tip of the iceberg. There were similar high-risk investments in Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, all funneled through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. But it wasn't just about the money. As they dug deeper, Grace and Lucian uncovered evidence of bribery, blackmail, and even connections to organized crime syndicates in Southeast Asia. The Mason Vance that Grace thought she knew was a carefully crafted illusion. The real man behind the charming facade was ruthless, corrupt, and dangerous. One evening, as they pored over documents in Lucian's office, Grace came across something that made her blood run cold. It was an email chain between Mason and a man named Dr. Anton Kovac, a little-known researcher working on experimental treatments for neuromuscular disorders. "Lucian," she called out, her voice shaking. "Look at this." Lucian leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing as he read. The emails detailed a series of payments from one of Mason's shell companies to Dr. Kovacs, along with requests for a specially formulated compound designed to mimic the symptoms of myasthenia gravis. "Oh my God," Grace whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "He's been poisoning me all this time. It wasn't just my condition getting worse. He's been actively making me sick." Lucian's face darkened with anger. "This is it, Grace. This is the smoking gun we've been looking for. With this, we can prove not only the financial crimes, but also attempted murder." Grace nodded, a strange calm settling over her. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Now it was time to act. "We need to get this to the FBI right away," she said, standing up. "But first, I need to confront Mason." Lucian's eyes widened in alarm. Grace, no, it's too dangerous. Let the authorities handle this. But Grace was already shaking her head. I need to do this, Lucian. I need to look him in the eye and hear him admit what he's done. I owe myself that much. Despite Lucian's protests, Grace knew her mind was made up. She would face Mason one last time, not as the docile, sickly wife he thought he had under his thumb, but as the strong, determined woman she truly was. The drive home was surreal. The familiar streets of Aurora seemed alien now, as if the revelation of Mason's true nature had cast a dark pall over the entire city. As Grace pulled into the driveway of the home she had once loved, she felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Mason's car was in the garage, and lights blazed from the windows. Taking a deep breath, Grace stepped out of her car and walked to the front door. Her key turned in the lock, and she stepped inside. "Mason," she called out, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We need to talk." She found him in his study, a glass of scotch in hand as he pored over some documents. He looked up as she entered, his expression a mask of concern that now seemed so obviously false. "Grace, darling," he said, rising from his chair. "I was worried. You're home late." Grace met his gaze unflinchingly. "I know everything, Mason. The embezzlement, the offshore accounts, your affair with Marcella, and I know what you've been doing to me." For a moment, Mason's mask slipped, shock and anger flashing across his face before he composed himself. "I don't know what you're talking about, Grace. You're clearly confused. Perhaps we should call Dr. Patel." "Stop it," Grace cut him off, her voice sharp. "No more lies, no more gaslighting. I have proof of everything, including your little arrangement with Dr. Kovac. It's over, Mason." The silence that followed was deafening. Mason's face hardened, the pretense of the caring husband falling away to reveal the cold, calculating man beneath. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Grace," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just walk in here and threaten me? You have no proof that would stand up in court. It's your word against mine, and who do you think people will believe? The respected businessman or his sick, confused wife?" Grace felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood her ground. "You're wrong, Mason. I have documents, emails, financial records, and I'm not alone in this. The authorities are already involved." Mason's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his face before it was replaced by cold fury. He took a step towards her, his fists clenched at his sides. "You stupid bitch," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The people I'm involved with, they'll destroy us both if this gets out." Grace backed away, her heart racing. She had never seen this side of Mason before, and it terrified her. But she refused to let him see her fear. "It's already done, Mason," she said, her voice remarkably calm. "It's time to face the consequences of your actions." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mason lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. Grace stumbled backwards, her foot catching on the edge of the rug. As she fell, she saw Mason's hand reaching for her throat. But before he could touch her, the study door burst open. Lucian rushed in, followed closely by two men in suits who Grace assumed were FBI agents. "FBI, freeze!" one of the agents shouted, his gun trained on Mason. Mason froze, his hands raised in the air. The look he gave Grace was one of pure hatred, but she met his gaze steadily, refusing to be cowed. As the agents handcuffed Mason and read him his rights, Lucian helped Grace to her feet. She leaned against him, suddenly feeling the full weight of everything that had happened. "It's over," Lucian murmured, his arm steady around her waist. "You did it, Grace. You're safe now." But even as relief washed over her, Grace knew this was far from over. Mason's arrest was just the beginning. There would be trials, publicity, the task of rebuilding her life and her company in the wake of this betrayal. As she watched the agents lead Mason away, Grace felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness for the life and love she had lost, anger at the years of manipulation and abuse, but also a growing sense of freedom. For the first time in years, she felt truly in control of her own destiny. Turning to Lucian, she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Lucian squeezed her hand gently. "You're stronger than you know, Grace. You did this. I just helped point you in the right direction." As they walked out of the house together, Grace took one last look at the life she was leaving behind. The perfectly manicured lawn, the elegant facade of the house. It all seemed so hollow now, a beautiful shell hiding a rotten core. But as she climbed into Lucian's car, Grace felt a surge of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. She had faced her greatest fear, confronted the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her, and come out the other side stronger. The night air was cool on her face as they drove away, leaving behind the shattered remains of her old life. Grace didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them on her own terms. As the lights of Aurora faded in the rearview mirror, Grace allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She had reclaimed her life, her health, and her dignity. And no matter what came next, she knew she had the strength to face it. The story of Grace Whitmore was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The weeks following Mason's arrest were a whirlwind of activity for Grace. As news of the scandal broke, she found herself at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside her home, their cameras flashing like strobe lights whenever she dared to step outside. The headlines were relentless. Vance Enterprises CEO arrested in massive fraud scheme. Grace Whitmore victim or accomplice. The court of public opinion was in full session, and Grace felt the weight of its judgment acutely. But amidst the chaos, Grace discovered a wellspring of inner strength she never knew she possessed. With Lucian by her side, she began the arduous task of reclaiming her life and her company. Her first order of business was Whitmore Interiors. The revelation of Mason's crimes had sent shockwaves through the business community, and Grace knew she needed to act fast to save her company's reputation. She called an emergency meeting with her team, her heart pounding as she faced her employees for the first time since the scandal broke. "I know you all have questions," Grace began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "And you deserve answers. I want to assure you that Whitmore Interiors was not involved in Mason's illegal activities. We are and always have been a legitimate and ethical business." She paused, taking in the sea of concerned faces before her. "I understand if recent events have shaken your faith in this company, but I'm asking you to trust me. Together, we can weather this storm and come out stronger on the other side." To her surprise and relief, her team rallied around her. Jennifer, her assistant, was the first to speak up. "We're with you, Grace. Just tell us what you need." Buoyed by their support, Grace threw herself into damage control. She hired a PR firm to help manage the company's image and reached out personally to their most important clients to reassure them of Whitmore Interiors' stability and integrity. But even as she worked tirelessly to save her business, Grace knew she couldn't ignore the bigger picture. Mason's arrest had exposed only the tip of the iceberg. There were still many unanswered questions about the full extent of his crimes and who else might be involved. Late one night, as she pored over financial documents in her home office, Grace received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, and she answered with trepidation. "Mrs. Whitmore," a gruff voice said. "This is Detective Robert Simmons. I'm leading the investigation into your husband's case. I was wondering if we could meet. There are some things we need to discuss." Grace agreed, her mind racing with possibilities. The next day, she met Detective Simmons at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Aurora. He was a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, but his eyes were kind as he shook her hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'll cut to the chase," he said once they were seated. "We believe your husband's operation goes much deeper than we initially thought. We're talking about a network of corrupt businessmen, politicians, maybe even law enforcement. We need your help to unravel it all." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you need from me?" "Information," Simmons replied. "Anything you can remember about Mason's associates, his business dealings, even seemingly insignificant details about his daily routine. And we may need you to play a more active role in the investigation." Grace's eyes widened. "You mean go undercover?" Simmons nodded gravely. "It's dangerous, I won't lie to you, but you're in a unique position. These people know you, trust you. They might let things slip around you that they'd never say to us." For a moment, Grace was overwhelmed by the enormity of what the detective was asking. But then, she thought of everything Mason had done, the lives he had ruined, and she felt a steely resolve settle over her. "I'll do it," she said firmly, "whatever it takes to bring them all down." And so began Grace's double life. By day, she was Grace Whitmore, the wronged wife fighting to save her business. But in secret, she was gathering intelligence, attending social events with a hidden microphone, and reporting back to Detective Simmons. It was at one of these events, a charity gala for the Aurora Children's Hospital, that Grace had her first major breakthrough. She overheard a conversation between two board members of Vance Enterprises discussing a series of properties in Vietnam that didn't appear on any official records. As she relayed this information to Simmons later that night, Grace felt a mix of excitement and fear. She was making progress, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a dangerous tightrope. Throughout it all, Lucien remained her rock. He helped her navigate the legal minefield surrounding Mason's case, offered a shoulder to cry on during her lowest moments, and celebrated her victories, no matter how small. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner at Lucien's apartment, Grace found herself studying his face. The lines of worry that had seemed permanently etched there in recent weeks had softened, and there was a warmth in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "What?" Lucien asked, noticing her gaze. Grace smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on her face after so many weeks of stress and fear. "I was just thinking, I don't know how I would have gotten through all this without you." Lucien reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Grace. You would have found a way." As their eyes met, Grace felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of attraction, of possibility. But before she could explore the feeling further, her phone buzzed with a message from Detective Simmons. The moment was broken, but the warmth lingered. As the investigation progressed, Grace found herself facing unexpected obstacles. Some of her oldest friends, people she had known for years, began to distance themselves. The stigma of the scandal was too much for them to bear. It hurt, but Grace refused to let it break her. Instead, she found support in unlikely places. Astrid, of course, remained steadfast, a constant presence at Grace's side, but there were others too. Sarah Chen, a junior designer at Whitmore Interiors, stepped up in ways Grace never expected, taking on extra responsibilities and becoming a valuable confidant. And then there was Evelyn Blackwood, the formidable matriarch of Aurora's social scene. Grace had always found her intimidating, but in the wake of the scandal, Evelyn became an unexpected ally. "My dear," Evelyn said one afternoon over tea, her voice as crisp as her perfectly pressed suit, "I've known more than my share of scoundrels in high places. What your husband did is unforgivable. But you're made of stronger stuff. This town would do well to remember that." With Evelyn's support, Grace found doors opening that had previously been slammed shut. She was able to salvage business relationships she thought were lost, and slowly but surely, Whitmore Interiors began to stabilize. But even as things improved on the business front, the danger of Grace's undercover work intensified. She began to notice strange cars parked outside her house, felt eyes on her whenever she went out in public. The net was closing in, and Grace knew it was only a matter of time before someone realized what she was doing. The breaking point came on a chilly autumn evening. Grace was working late at the office, going over some financial records Detective Simmons had asked her to review. The sound of the elevator arriving on her floor made her pause. It was well past business hours. No one else should be here. Heart pounding, Grace quickly hid the sensitive documents and tried to look busy with some innocuous design sketches. The office door opened and she looked up to see Marcella Langley standing there, a cold smile on her face. "Hello, Grace," Marcella purred, sauntering into the room. "Working late, I see. How dedicated of you." Grace forced herself to remain calm, even as alarm bells rang in her head. "Marcella, this is a surprise. What brings you here?" Marcella's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by, see how you're holding up with all this unpleasantness." As Marcella spoke, she moved around the office, her fingers trailing over surfaces as if looking for something. Grace's mind raced. Did Marcella suspect her involvement with the investigation? Was this a fishing expedition or something more sinister? "That's thoughtful of you," Grace replied carefully. "As you can see, I'm managing. Whitmore Interiors keeps me busy." Marcella turned to face her, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Cut the act, Grace. We both know you're not just managing. You've been poking your nose where it doesn't belong, and certain people are getting nervous." Grace felt her blood run cold, but she held Marcella's gaze steadily. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marcella laughed, a harsh sound that sent shivers down Grace's spine. "Please, did you really think we wouldn't notice? The questions you've been asking, the people you've been talking to. You're playing a very dangerous game, Grace." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This is your only warning. Back off, or things might get unpleasant. For you and for those you care about." Understood? Before Grace could respond, Marcella turned on her heel and strode out of the office. The click of her heels on the hardwood floor echoed like gunshots in the silent space. As soon as she was gone, Grace's composure crumbled. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone to call Lucien. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth or saving her company. Now, it was a matter of life and death. Lucien arrived at the office in record time, his face etched with concern, as Grace recounted her encounter with Marcella. "This changes everything," he said, pacing the room. "We need to tell Simmons. It's not safe for you to continue with this undercover work." But even as fear coursed through her, Grace felt a steely resolve settle over her. "No," she said firmly. "This means we're close to something big. We can't back down now." Lucien looked at her, a mix of admiration and worry in his eyes. "Grace, this isn't a game. These people are dangerous." "I know," she replied softly, "but I've come too far to give up now. We just need to be smarter, more careful." As they discussed their next moves, Grace felt a shift in her relationship with Lucien. The lines between lawyer and client, between friends and something more, were blurring. In this moment of crisis, she realized just how much she had come to rely on him, to trust him, to care for him. The next few weeks were a delicate balancing act for Grace. She had to maintain the appearance of a woman cowed by recent events, while secretly working harder than ever to gather evidence. She installed new security systems at her home and office, varied her routines, and never went anywhere alone. But even as the danger increased, Grace found herself growing stronger. The woman who had once allowed Mason to control every aspect of her life was gone. In her place was someone new, someone resilient, determined, and unafraid to fight for what was right. This new strength was put to the test when Grace received an unexpected visitor at Whitmore Interiors. It was a young woman, barely out of her teens, with haunted eyes and trembling hands. "Mrs. Whitmore," the girl said hesitantly, "my name is Lily. I used to work for your husband. There are things you need to know." Over the next hour, Lily poured out a story that made Grace's blood boil. The girl had been hired as an intern at Vance Enterprises, but quickly found herself trapped in a web of manipulation and abuse. Mason and his associates had used her, threatened her, and discarded her when she became a liability. As Grace listened, her heart breaking for this young woman, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the people Mason and his cronies had hurt, all the lives they had destroyed in their pursuit of wealth and power. "Lily," Grace said gently when the girl had finished her story, "I want you to know that you're not alone. What happened to you wasn't your fault, and I promise you we're going to make this right." With Lily's testimony, Grace and Lucien had a new piece of the puzzle. They worked tirelessly, connecting dots, following paper trails, and slowly but surely building a case that would bring down not just Mason, but the entire corrupt network he was part of. As the net tightened around Mason and his associates, Grace felt the tension building to a crescendo. She knew they were close to a breakthrough, but she also knew that the most dangerous time in any confrontation is when your opponent is cornered. One evening, as Grace was leaving a late meeting with Detective Simmons, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Someone was following her. With her heart pounding, she quickened her pace, fishing her phone out of her purse to call Lucien. But before she could dial, a hand clamped over her mouth and she felt herself being dragged into a nearby alley. Grace fought with everything she had, kicking and struggling against her attacker. As she battled for her life in that dark alley, time seemed to slow down. In that moment, Grace saw her life flash before her eyes. Not just the pain and betrayal of recent months, but all of it. The triumphs and failures, the joys and sorrows that had shaped her into the woman she was today. And in that moment, Grace made a decision. She would not be a victim. Not again. Not ever. With a surge of adrenaline, she broke free from her attacker's grip, spinning around to face them. In the dim light, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face, one of Mason's former bodyguards. "You picked the wrong woman to mess with," Grace snarled, her voice filled with a fury she didn't know she possessed. What happened next was a blur of motion and instinct. Grace fought with everything she had, using every self-defense move Lucien had insisted she learn. By the time help arrived, alerted by the commotion, Grace stood victorious over her would-be assailant. As the police led the man away, Lucien rushed to Grace's side, his face pale with worry. "Grace, are you all right? I came as soon as I got your message." Grace looked at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." As Lucien held her, his arms strong and comforting around her, Grace felt something shift inside her. The last pieces of the old Grace, the one who had allowed herself to be controlled and manipulated, fell away. In their place stood a woman who had faced her worst fears and emerged victorious. The attack was a turning point. It showed Mason and his associates that Grace was not going to be intimidated, but it also showed Grace herself just how far she had come. As she gave her statement to the police, Grace's mind was already racing ahead. This attack was a sign of desperation. Mason and his cronies were feeling the pressure. It was time to make their final move. With renewed determination, Grace turned to Lucien. "We're close," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I can feel it. It's time to end this, once and for all." Lucien nodded, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. "Whatever you need, Grace, I'm with you every step of the way." As they walked away from the scene, hand in hand, Grace felt a sense of calm settle over her. The road ahead would be difficult, the final confrontation undoubtedly dangerous. But for the first time in a long time, Grace Whitmore was not afraid. She was ready. The stage was set for the final act in this drama of betrayal and redemption, and Grace was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The day of the annual Vance Enterprises shareholders meeting dawned crisp and clear, belying the storm that was about to break. Grace stood before her bedroom mirror, smoothing down her tailored navy suit, her face a mask of determination. Today was the day everything would change. "Are you sure about this?" Lucien asked, his reflection appearing behind her in the mirror. His eyes were filled with concern, but there was also pride there and something else, something that made Grace's heart skip a beat. She turned to face him, her chin lifted in defiance. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Lucien. It's time to end this." As they drove to the Vance Enterprises headquarters, Grace ran through the plan one last time in her mind. Everything was in place. The evidence gathered, the key witnesses prepped, the authorities on standby. All that remained was for her to light the fuse. The lobby of Vance Enterprises was a hive of activity, shareholders and board members milling about, their chatter filling the air with a nervous energy. As Grace entered, a hush fell over the crowd. She could feel their eyes on her, some sympathetic, others suspicious, but she kept her gaze fixed ahead, her stride purposeful. In the elevator, Lucien gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Remember," he said softly, "no matter what happens in there, you've already won. You've reclaimed your life, your strength, everything else is just details." Grace nodded, drawing strength from his words and his presence. As the elevator doors opened onto the top floor, she took a deep breath. It was time. The boardroom was packed, every seat filled with additional chairs brought in to accommodate the overflow. At the head of the table sat Mason, looking impeccable in a designer suit, his face a mask of calm confidence. Beside him, Marcella Langley surveyed the room with a predatory gaze. As Grace entered, Mason's eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something, fear, uncertainty, cross his face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual charming smile. "Ah, Grace," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I'm so glad you could join us. Please take a seat." Grace remained standing, her gaze sweeping the room. "Actually, Mason, I think I'll stay right here. I have some things to say, and I want to make sure everyone can hear me clearly." A murmur ran through the assembled shareholders. Mason's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Grace, dear, this really isn't the time or place for personal matters. We have important business to discuss." "Oh, I couldn't agree more," Grace interrupted, her voice steady and clear. "We have very important business to discuss indeed, starting with the systematic fraud and embezzlement that has been occurring at the highest levels of this company." The room erupted in shocked gasps and confused murmurs. Mason half rose from his chair, his face darkening with anger. "Grace, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I suggest you stop right now before you embarrass yourself further." Grace stood her ground, unflinching. "I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, Mason. Not when I have proof of your illegal activities right here." She nodded to Lucien, who began distributing folders to the board members and key shareholders. As the room buzzed with the sound of rustling papers and shocked exclamations, Grace continued. In those folders, you'll find documented evidence of funds being siphoned from Vance Enterprises into a series of shell companies. You'll see records of bribes paid to foreign officials, of money laundering operations, and of a massive Ponzi scheme that has put this entire company at risk. Mason's face had gone pale, his eyes darting around the room as he watched his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "These documents are clearly fabricated." Grace is obviously still unwell, confused by her condition and the stress of recent events. "I can assure you, Mr. Vance, that Mrs. Whitmore is perfectly sound of mind," a new voice cut in. Detective Simmons stepped forward from where he had been waiting near the door. "And these documents have all been verified by forensic accountants. They're very real, and they paint a very damning picture." As the detective spoke, several uniformed officers entered the room. The tension in the air was palpable, like electricity before a storm. Mason's composure finally cracked. He leapt to his feet, pointing an accusing finger at Grace. "You," he snarled, "you treacherous bitch! Do you have any idea what you've done?" Grace met his gaze steadily, unflinching in the face of his rage. "I've done exactly what I should have done a long time ago, Mason. I've stood up to you. I've exposed your lies and your crimes. And now, you're going to face the consequences." As if on cue, one of the officers stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Mason Vance, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." The room exploded into chaos. Shareholders leapt to their feet, shouting questions and demands. Board members huddled together, their faces pale with shock and fear. And in the midst of it all, Marcella Langley saw her chance. With the attention of the room focused on Mason's arrest, Marcella slipped from her chair and made a dash for the door, but Grace had been watching for this very move. "Stop her!" Grace shouted, pointing at Marcella's retreating figure. Lucian, positioned near the exit, moved to intercept. But Marcella was quick, her desperation lending her speed. She shoved past him, her high heels clicking frantically as she ran down the hallway towards the elevators. Grace didn't hesitate. She kicked off her own heels and gave chase, her stockinged feet silent on the polished floor. Behind her she could hear Lucian and Detective Simmons following, but she was faster, driven by a burning determination to see justice done. Marcella reached the elevators, jabbing frantically at the call button. But the cars were all on the ground floor, responding to the flood of people trying to leave the building after news of the arrests began to spread. Realizing she was trapped, Marcella spun around, her back pressed against the elevator doors, her eyes wild with fear and fury. "Stay back!" she screamed as Grace approached. "I'm warning you!" Grace slowed her approach, her hands held out in a placating gesture. "It's over, Marcella," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "There's nowhere left to run. Do the right thing and turn yourself in." For a moment, it seemed as though Marcella might comply. Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. But then, with a sudden burst of energy, she lunged at Grace, her manicured nails raking across Grace's face. Grace stumbled back, more from surprise than pain. But before Marcella could press her advantage, Lucian was there, grabbing her arms and pinning them behind her back. "That's enough," he said, his voice hard as steel. "Marcella Langley, you're under arrest as an accomplice to Mason Vance's crimes." As Detective Simmons took custody of Marcella, reading her rights, Grace leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. It was done. After months of fear, uncertainty, and pain, it was finally over. Lucian was at her side in an instant, his hands gentle as he examined the scratches on her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. Grace nodded, managing a small smile. "I'm fine," she said. "It's just, it doesn't feel real yet." After everything we've been through, to have it end like this. Lucian pulled her into a tight embrace, and Grace allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, burying her face in his chest as the emotions of the past months washed over her. "It's real," Lucian murmured into her hair. "You did it, Grace. You brought them down." As they stood there, the sounds of chaos from the boardroom slowly fading, Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like years, she could breathe freely. But even as she savored this moment of victory, Grace knew that the battle was far from over. The arrests were just the beginning. There would be trials, media scrutiny, the daunting task of rebuilding Vance Enterprises' reputation and her own life. Yet as she looked up at Lucian, seeing the pride and admiration shining in his eyes, Grace felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had reclaimed her strength, her voice, her power, and she would never let anyone take that away from her again. The legal proceedings against Mason Vance and his co-conspirators became the talk of Aurora, dominating headlines and water cooler conversations for months. The courthouse steps were a daily circus of reporters, curious onlookers and protesters demanding justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and charged. Grace found herself at the center of it all, a key witness for the prosecution. As she took the stand for the first time, she felt the weight of all eyes upon her. Mason sat at the defense table, his once immaculate appearance now haggard, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and desperation as he stared at her. "Mrs. Whitmore," the prosecutor began, her voice gentle but firm, "can you please tell the court about when you first became suspicious of your husband's activities?" Grace took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping the courtroom before settling on Lucian's supportive face in the gallery. Drawing strength from his presence, she began to speak. "It started with small things," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Hushed phone calls, mysterious meetings, changes in the company that didn't make sense. But it wasn't until after my diagnosis with myasthenia gravis that I began to see the full picture." Over the next hour, Grace laid out the entire sordid tale: Mason's increasing control over her life, the manipulation of her medication, the gradual uncovering of his fraudulent business practices. She spoke of the fear she had lived with, the moments of doubt and despair, and the strength she had found to fight back. As she spoke, she could see the impact her words were having on the jury. Faces that had been impassive at the start of her testimony now showed shock, anger, and sympathy. When it came time for cross-examination, Mason's defense attorney tried to paint Grace as an unreliable witness, suggesting that her illness had affected her perception of events. But Grace remained calm and steadfast, her responses clear and unwavering. "Yes, my illness affected my life," she said in response to one particularly pointed question, "but it didn't affect my ability to recognize betrayal and criminal behavior. If anything, it made me more aware of the manipulation I was subjected to." As she stepped down from the witness stand, Grace felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had faced her fears, looked Mason in the eye, and told her truth. Whatever the outcome of the trial, she knew she had reclaimed her voice. The trial stretched on for weeks with a parade of witnesses taking the stand. Former employees of Vance Enterprises testified about the pressure to falsify records and participate in illegal schemes. Financial experts broke down the complex web of fraud and money laundering. Even Marcella Langley, in a bid for leniency, turned state's evidence, providing damning testimony about her role in Mason's crimes. Throughout it all, Grace attended every day of the trial, a silent but powerful presence in the courtroom. She watched as Mason's carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the true nature of the man she had once loved. The emotional toll of the trial was immense. There were days when Grace felt as though she couldn't bear to hear one more sordid detail, one more revelation of betrayal. But she persevered, drawing strength from the support of Lucian, Astrid, and the unexpected allies she had found along the way. One particularly difficult day came when Lily, the young intern who had been victimized by Mason and his associates, took the stand. As the girl recounted her experiences, her voice trembling but determined, Grace felt her heart break anew. She caught Lily's eye as she stepped down from the witness stand, trying to convey all the support and encouragement she could in a single look. During a recess, Grace found Lily in the hallway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "Lily," Grace said softly, approaching the young woman, "I just wanted to tell you how brave you were up there. Your testimony, it's going to make a difference. It already has." Lily looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do you really think so, Mrs. Whitmore? Sometimes I feel like it was all for nothing. Like no one will believe me over someone like Mr. Vance." Grace reached out, gently squeezing Lily's shoulder. "I believe you," she said firmly. "The jury believes you. And thanks to your courage, Mason and people like him won't be able to hurt anyone else. You've helped break the cycle, Lily. That's incredibly powerful." As Lily broke down in tears, Grace pulled her into a comforting embrace. In that moment, she felt a fierce protectiveness wash over her. She vowed silently that no matter the outcome of the trial, she would do everything in her power to help Lily and others like her rebuild their lives. The climax of the trial came during Mason's own testimony. Taking the stand in his own defense, he attempted to portray himself as a victim of circumstance, a businessman caught up in events beyond his control. But under the relentless questioning of the prosecutor, his carefully crafted story began to unravel. "Mr. Vance," the prosecutor said, her voice sharp, "can you explain these emails between yourself and Dr. Anton Kovac, discussing the special formulation of medication for your wife?" Mason's face paled visibly. That was simply a misunderstanding. I was concerned about Grace's health, trying to explore all options. Options that included deliberately worsening your wife's condition to gain control of her assets, the prosecutor interrupted. Options that put Mrs. Whitmore's life at risk for your own financial gain. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of shock and disgust. Grace felt Lucian's hand close over hers, offering silent support as they watched Mason flounder on the stand. As Mason's testimony continued to crumble under scrutiny, Grace could see the moment he realized it was all over. The mask of confidence slipped, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. In a sudden burst of rage, Mason leapt to his feet, pointing an accusing finger at Grace. "This is all your fault," he shouted, his face contorted with fury. "Thou ungrateful interfering bitch. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." The judge's gavel came down hard, calling for order, but the damage was done. Mason's outburst had revealed his true nature to the entire courtroom, destroying any remaining sympathy the jury might have had for him. As the bailiffs restrained Mason, forcing him back into his seat, Grace met his gaze steadily. In his eyes, she saw a mixture of hatred and desperation that might once have terrified her. But now she felt only pity for the pathetic figure before her. The jury's deliberations were surprisingly brief. After only 2 days, they returned with their verdict. As the forewoman stood to deliver the decision, Grace felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant Mason Vance guilty. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of reactions. Gasps, cries of vindication, the frantic scribbling of reporters' pens. But Grace heard none of it. All she could focus on was the continued litany of guilty verdicts as the forewoman read through the long list of charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy, attempted murder. With each pronouncement, Grace felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. It was over, justice had been served. As the judge began to discuss sentencing, Grace finally allowed herself to really look at Mason. The man she had once loved, who had betrayed her in the worst possible way, now sat slumped in his chair, all pretense of strength and control stripped away. For a moment their eyes met across the courtroom. Grace saw a flicker of something in Mason's gaze: regret, fear, a plea for mercy, but she hardened her heart against it. He had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. The judge's voice cut through Grace's thoughts. "Mason Vance, you have been found guilty of numerous serious crimes. Your actions have caused immeasurable harm, not only to your victims, but to the trust and integrity of the business community. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. The gavel came down with a final resounding thud. It was done. As Mason was led away in handcuffs, Grace felt a storm of emotions wash over her. Relief, vindication, a lingering sadness for what might have been, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. She had faced her greatest fear, confronted the man who had nearly destroyed her, and come out victorious. As the courtroom began to empty, Grace remained in her seat, overwhelmed by the finality of it all. Lucian gently placed his hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her in the moment. "Grace," he said softly, "are you all right?" She looked up at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I think I am. It's really over, isn't it?" Lucian nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. "It is. You did it, Grace. You stood up to him, you fought back, and you won." As they stood to leave, Grace was suddenly surrounded by well-wishers, other victims of Mason's schemes, employees of Vance Enterprises who had been kept in the dark, even some of the jurors who had lingered behind. They all wanted to shake her hand, to thank her for her courage in bringing the truth to light. Among the crowd, Grace spotted Lily, the young intern whose testimony had been so crucial. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a newfound strength in her posture. Grace made her way over to her, enveloping her in a warm embrace. "Thank you," Lily whispered, "for believing in me, for giving me the courage to speak up." Grace pulled back, holding Lily at arm's length. "You had that courage all along, Lily. You just needed to find it. And now you've helped ensure that Mason can never hurt anyone else again." As they exited the courthouse, Grace was momentarily blinded by the flashing of cameras. The steps were crowded with reporters, all clamoring for a statement. For a moment, Grace hesitated, overwhelmed by the attention. But then she felt Lucian's reassuring presence beside her, and she stepped forward to address the media. "Today, justice has been served," she began, her voice clear and strong. "But this victory isn't just for me. It's for every person who has ever been manipulated, abused, or taken advantage of by those in positions of power. It's for every whistleblower who has risked everything to expose the truth, and it's a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always hope if we have the courage to stand up for what's right." As Grace finished speaking, a cheer went up from the crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. She saw faces filled with hope, with admiration, with a renewed faith in justice. In that moment, she realized that her ordeal had transformed her into something she never expected, a symbol of resilience and courage for others. Later that evening, as the sun set over Aurora, Grace found herself standing on the balcony of her home, looking out over the city she had once again come to love. The lights twinkled below, each one representing a life, a story, a potential for change. Lucian joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "I thought we might celebrate," he said, a hint of shyness in his voice that Grace found endearing. She smiled, clinking her glass against his. "To new beginnings," she said softly. As they stood there, sipping their champagne in comfortable silence, Grace felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There was still much to do in terms of rebuilding Vance Enterprises and her own life. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly hopeful about the future. "Lucian," she said, turning to face him, "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You've been my rock, my support, my everything." Lucian set down his glass, taking both of Grace's hands in his. "Grace, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. It has been an honor to stand by your side through all of this. And, if you'll let me, I'd like to keep standing by your side for whatever comes next." Grace felt her heart skip a beat. The connection between them, which had been growing steadily throughout their ordeal, suddenly felt electric. Without a word, she leaned in, pressing her lips gently against his. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, but quickly deepened into something more passionate. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Grace felt as though she was seeing Lucian, seeing everything, with new eyes. "Whatever comes next," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her lips, "we'll face it together." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the city spread out before them, Grace knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning. She had survived the darkest chapter of her life, emerging stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and opportunities alike. But Grace Whitmore was ready to face it head-on, with courage, integrity, and an unwavering belief in her own strength. Her journey of betrayal and redemption had transformed her, and now, with Lucian by her side and a renewed sense of purpose, she was prepared to write the next chapter of her story, one of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The days following Mason's conviction were a whirlwind of activity for Grace. As news of the verdict spread, her phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, well-wishers, and business associates, all eager to hear her perspective on the trial's outcome. Grace found herself thrust into the spotlight, a role she had never sought but now embraced with a newfound confidence. On a crisp Monday morning, just a week after the trial's conclusion, Grace stood before the entrance of Vance Enterprises, soon to be renamed Whitmore Industries. She paused for a moment, taking in the familiar facade with new eyes. This building, once a symbol of her confinement, now represented opportunity and redemption. As she pushed through the revolving doors, Grace was met with a cacophony of applause. The lobby was filled with employees, all clapping and cheering as she made her way to the elevators. Faces that had once regarded her with pity or suspicion now shone with admiration and respect. Jennifer, her loyal assistant, was waiting for her when the elevator doors opened on the executive floor. "Welcome back, Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've all been looking forward to this day." Grace smiled warmly, touched by the genuine affection in Jennifer's voice. "It's good to be back, Jennifer, and please call me Grace. We've been through too much together for such formalities." As they walked towards the boardroom, Grace could feel the energy in the office, a palpable mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Rebuilding the company's reputation and restoring employee morale would be a monumental task. But as she pushed open the boardroom doors to face the assembled executives and board members, Grace felt ready for the challenge. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I know we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I want you all to know that I believe in this company and in each one of you. Together, we're going to turn Whitmore Industries into a model of ethical business practices and innovation." Over the next few hours, Grace laid out her vision for the company's future. She introduced new transparency measures, outlined plans for ethical audits, and proposed a series of initiatives aimed at rebuilding trust with clients and shareholders. As she spoke, she could see the doubt and uncertainty in the room gradually giving way to hope and determination. By the end of the day, Grace felt exhausted but exhilarated. As she packed up her things to leave, she caught sight of a framed photo on her desk, a picture of her and Mason at a charity gala years ago. For a moment she felt a pang of sadness for the life and love she had lost, but then she remembered all she had gained, her freedom, her strength, and a new sense of purpose. With a decisive motion, Grace removed the photo from its frame and dropped it into the trash. It was time to create new memories, to fill her life and her office with images that reflected who she was now, not who she had been. As the weeks passed, Grace threw herself into the work of rebuilding Whitmore Industries. She hired a team of ethical compliance officers, implemented new checks and balances to prevent fraud, and personally reached out to clients who had been affected by Mason's schemes. One particularly challenging meeting was with Harold Bradshaw, CEO of a major real estate development firm that had lost millions due to Mason's fraudulent investments. Grace sat across from him in a downtown restaurant, acutely aware of the skepticism in his eyes. "Mr. Bradshaw," she began, "I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened to your company. What Mason did was inexcusable, and I understand if you have reservations about working with us again." Bradshaw leaned back in his chair, his expression guarded. "It's not just about the money, Mrs. Whitmore, it's about trust. How can I be sure that Whitmore Industries isn't still operating under the same corrupt principles?" Grace nodded, understanding his concern. "You're absolutely right to ask that question. Trust has to be earned, and we're committed to doing just that." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "This is a comprehensive outline of the new ethical guidelines and oversight measures we've put in place. I'd like you to review it. And if you're willing, I'd love to give you a tour of our operations so you can see these changes in action." By the end of the lunch, Bradshaw's demeanor had softened considerably. While he wasn't ready to commit to new business just yet, he agreed to keep the lines of communication open. A small victory, but one that filled Grace with hope. As she worked to rebuild the company, Grace also focused on her own healing process. The years of emotional manipulation and physical strain had taken their toll, and she knew she needed to address both her mental and physical health. She began seeing Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a therapist specializing in trauma and recovery. In their sessions, Grace confronted the complex emotions surrounding her relationship with Mason, the anger, the betrayal, but also the lingering love and grief for the life she had lost. "It's normal to have conflicting feelings," Dr. Rodriguez assured her during one particularly difficult session. "You spent years building a life with Mason. It's okay to mourn that loss, even as you move forward." Grace nodded, wiping away tears. "Sometimes I feel guilty for not seeing through his deception earlier. If I had been stronger, more observant." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her eyes kind but firm. "Grace, you were a victim of sophisticated, long-term emotional and physical abuse. The fact that you found the strength to fight back at all is remarkable. You're not responsible for Mason's actions." These sessions, though often emotionally draining, helped Grace process her trauma and begin to rebuild her sense of self-worth. She learned techniques for managing anxiety and started to reframe her experiences not as failures, but as hard-won lessons that had ultimately made her stronger. Physically, Grace worked with Dr. Patel to address the damage done by Mason's manipulation of her medication. With the correct treatment regimen, she began to see significant improvements in her myasthenia gravis symptoms. Simple tasks that had once been exhausting became manageable, and Grace reveled in her newfound energy. She even started taking self-defense classes, a decision sparked by her encounter with Mason's bodyguard during the investigation. The physical exertion was therapeutic, helping her work through residual anger and fear while also empowering her with the knowledge that she could protect herself. Throughout this period of healing and rebuilding, Lucien remained a constant source of support. Their relationship, which had begun in the crucible of crisis, now blossomed in the calmer waters of everyday life. One Saturday morning, as they strolled hand in hand through a local farmer's market, Grace found herself marveling at the simple joy of the moment. The sun was warm on her face, the air filled with the scent of fresh produce and flowers, and beside her was a man who had seen her at her lowest and still looked at her with admiration and love. "What are you thinking?" Lucien asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Grace squeezed his hand, a smile playing at her lips. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, how different everything is now." Lucien pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "You've accomplished so much, Grace. You should be proud of yourself." As they continued their walk, Grace felt a surge of gratitude for this new chapter in her life. She and Lucien were taking things slow, building a relationship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. It wasn't always easy. They both carried scars from the past, but it was real and honest in a way her relationship with Mason never had been. Back at Whitmore Industries, Grace worked tirelessly to rebuild trust with her employees. She instituted an open-door policy, encouraging staff at all levels to come to her with concerns or ideas. She also implemented a series of team-building exercises and company-wide volunteering initiatives aimed at fostering a sense of community and shared purpose. One such initiative was a partnership with a local women's shelter, providing job training and employment opportunities for survivors of domestic abuse. The project was close to Grace's heart, inspired by her own experiences and her desire to help others reclaim their lives. During a volunteer day at the shelter, Grace found herself working alongside Sarah, a young accountant from Whitmore's finance department. As they painted a room that would become a children's play area, Sarah hesitantly broached a subject that Grace knew had been on many employees' minds. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Grace," Sarah began, correcting herself with a small smile. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but how do you do it? How do you trust anyone after what happened?" Grace paused in her painting, considering the question carefully. "It's not easy," she admitted. "There are days when I still struggle with doubt and fear, but I've learned that closing yourself off, refusing to trust anyone, is its own kind of prison." She dipped her brush back into the cheerful yellow paint. "The key is to trust wisely, to pay attention to people's actions, not just their words, and to trust yourself, your instincts, your worth, your ability to handle whatever life throws at you." Sarah nodded, seeming to turn this over in her mind. "Thank you for being so open about everything. It means a lot to all of us." As word of Whitmore Industries' ethical reforms and community involvement spread, Grace began to see a shift in public perception. Clients who had distanced themselves in the wake of the scandal cautiously began to return. The company landed several high-profile contracts, each one a testament to the newfound trust in the Whitmore name. However, even as things improved, Grace remained vigilant. She knew all too well how quickly fortunes could change, and she was determined to protect what she had rebuilt. This caution proved warranted when, 6 months after Mason's conviction, Grace received a troubling phone call from Detective Simmons. "Mrs. Whitmore," the detective's gruff voice came through the line. "I hate to bother you, but something's come up that I think you should know about." Grace felt her stomach tighten. "What is it, Detective?" "We've been monitoring communications to and from Mason in prison," Simmons explained. "There's been some chatter that's got us concerned. It seems he might be trying to orchestrate some kind of retaliation against you from behind bars." Grace's mind raced with the implications. What kind of retaliation? Is it a credible threat? "We're not sure yet," Simmons admitted. "Could be nothing but hot air, but given Mason's connections and resources, we're taking it seriously. I'd advise you to be extra cautious, maybe beef up your security for a while." After hanging up, Grace sat at her desk, her hands shaking slightly as the familiar tendrils of fear crept back in. For a moment, she felt like she was right back where she started, scared, vulnerable, at the mercy of Mason's machinations. But then she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and reached for her phone. She had faced Mason's worst, and come out stronger. Whatever he might be planning, she would face it head on. "Lucian," she said when he answered, "I need your help with something. It seems our fight isn't quite over yet." As she began to explain the situation to Lucian, Grace felt a renewed sense of determination. She had rebuilt her life and her company from the ashes of betrayal. She had found strength she never knew she possessed and forged relationships built on genuine trust and respect. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage, integrity, and the unwavering support of those who had stood by her through the darkest of times. The road ahead might be uncertain, but Grace Whitmore was ready. She had weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged not just a survivor, but a beacon of resilience and hope for others. And she was determined to use her experiences, her platform, and her renewed strength to make a positive difference in the world. As the sun set over Aurora, casting a warm glow through her office windows, Grace allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led her to this moment, strong, free, and ready to write the next chapter of her story on her own terms. With renewed purpose, Grace turned back to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard as she began drafting plans for Whitmore Industries' next charitable initiative. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Grace Whitmore was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was the author of her own destiny, and she intended to make every word count. 2 years had passed since Mason's conviction, and the warm glow of a late summer evening bathed Aurora in golden light as Grace Whitmore stood at the podium, addressing the crowd gathered for the grand opening of the Whitmore Foundation's first Women's Empowerment Center. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grace began, her voice strong and clear, "when I look out at all of you today, I see more than just faces. I see stories of resilience, of courage, and of hope. Each of us has faced our own battles, our own moments of darkness, but we're here today because we refuse to let those moments define us." The audience, a mix of community leaders, survivors of abuse, and supporters of the foundation, listened intently as Grace continued. "This center is more than just a building. It's a promise that no woman in our community will have to face her struggles alone. Whether you're escaping an abusive relationship, fighting to reclaim your career, or simply searching for your own strength, you'll find support and resources here." As Grace spoke, her eyes scanned the crowd, landing on familiar faces. There was Lily, now a confident young woman working as a peer counselor at the center, Sarah from accounting, who had become one of Grace's most trusted advisors at Whitmore Industries, and in the front row, Lucian, his eyes shining with pride and love. "2 years ago I stood at a crossroads," Grace said, her voice softening. "I had lost everything I thought defined me, my marriage, my health, my sense of security. But in that darkness, I found a truth that I want to share with all of you. Our greatest strength often emerges from our deepest pain." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Grace could see tears in the eyes of some listeners, recognition and hope on the faces of others. Today, Whitmore Industries stands as a model of ethical business practices, but more importantly, we've created a community that lifts each other up, that refuses to let anyone fall through the cracks. This center is the next step in that mission. As Grace concluded her speech and the ribbon was cut, officially opening the center, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This moment represented not just her personal triumph over adversity, but a chance to create lasting, positive change in the lives of others. The reception that followed was a joyous affair. Grace moved through the crowd, chatting with attendees and sharing in their excitement for the center's potential. As she approached the refreshment table, she overheard a conversation that made her pause. "I can't believe how much she's changed," a woman was saying. "Remember how timid she used to be at those charity galas, always in Mason's shadow?" Her companion nodded. "It's like she's a completely different person now. So confident, so inspiring." Grace smiled to herself, touched by the observation. She had indeed changed in ways both profound and subtle. The scars of her ordeal remained, but they had become a source of strength rather than shame. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, Grace found a quiet moment with Lucian on the center's rooftop garden. The city lights twinkled below them, a carpet of stars mirrored in the urban landscape. "You were amazing tonight," Lucian said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I don't think there was a dry eye in the house during your speech." Grace leaned into him, savoring the warmth of his embrace. "I meant every word," she said softly. "None of this would have been possible without you, you know. Your support, your belief in me, it changed everything." Lucien turned to face her, his expression serious. "Grace, you did this. Your strength, your resilience, that all came from within you. I just had the privilege of witnessing it." As they stood there, the cool night breeze ruffling their hair, Grace felt a sense of peace she had once thought impossible. She and Lucien had built a life together, one based on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep, abiding love. It wasn't always easy. They both carried scars from the past, but it was real and honest in a way her relationship with Mason never had been. "I have something to tell you," Lucien said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I've been offered a position with the International Justice Mission. They want me to head up their legal team combating human trafficking in Southeast Asia." Grace's eyes widened. "Lucien, that's incredible. It's the kind of work you've always wanted to do." He nodded, studying her face carefully. "It would mean relocating to Bangkok for at least a year, maybe longer. I know we've talked about expanding the Foundation's work internationally, but this is sooner than we planned. If you don't want me to take it..." Grace silenced him with a kiss. "Of course you should take it," she said when they parted. "We'll make it work. The Foundation, Whitmore Industries, they're in good hands. This is your chance to make a real difference on a global scale." Lucien's face broke into a relieved smile. "I was hoping you'd say that. Actually, I was thinking, maybe this could be an opportunity for both of us. The Foundation could partner with IJM, set up empowerment centers in the communities we're working in." Grace felt a thrill of excitement at the idea. It was a new challenge, a chance to take everything she had learned and apply it on an international stage. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said, her mind already racing with possibilities. As they discussed the potential of this new venture, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had taken the pain of her past and transformed it into a force for good, not just for herself, but for countless others. And now, she had the opportunity to expand that impact even further. The night was winding down, the last of the guests departing when Grace received an unexpected visitor. Detective Simmons, now retired from the force, approached her with a grave expression. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice low, "I hate to disturb you on such a triumphant night, but there's something you need to know." Grace felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it, Detective?" Simmons glanced around, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "We've uncovered new evidence in Mason's case. It seems his network was even more extensive than we initially thought. There are indications of connections to high-level government officials, both here and abroad." Grace's mind reeled with the implications. Just when she thought that chapter of her life was closed, it seemed there were still pages unwritten. "What does this mean?" she asked. "It means that your testimony might be needed again," Simmons replied. "And it means you may still be at risk. Mason's allies won't take kindly to further exposure." For a moment, Grace felt a familiar fear creeping in, but then she straightened her shoulders, meeting Simmons' concerned gaze with determination. "Thank you for telling me, Detective. Whatever comes next, I'll be ready." As Simmons nodded and took his leave, Grace turned back to the city skyline. The revelation was unsettling, a reminder that the past was never truly buried. But as she reflected on how far she had come, on the lives she had touched and the strength she had discovered within herself, Grace felt not fear, but resolve. She had faced her darkest hour and emerged stronger. She had turned her pain into purpose, her struggles into a beacon of hope for others. Whatever challenges lay ahead, be they personal, professional, or echoes from the past, Grace Whitmore was ready to face them head-on. As the last lights of the reception were dimmed and the center stood quiet, awaiting the lives it would touch and transform, Grace took one last look around. This place, this moment, was a testament to the power of resilience, the strength found in community, and the enduring human capacity for growth and change. Grace Whitmore had begun her journey as a victim, but she would continue it as a survivor, a leader, and a catalyst for change. Her story, once defined by betrayal, was now an anthem of hope, and as she stepped out into the night, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold, Grace knew that the best chapters of her life were still waiting to be written. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and emotional tales, make sure to subscribe to our channel to catch the new stories we share daily. And if you missed our latest story, here's what happened. Celeste dedicated her life to the man she loved, but when she needed him the most, he cruelly discarded her. Diagnosed with late-stage cancer, she had hoped for support, but Alaric, her husband, chose the easy way out, abandoning her for a young, wealthy and healthy woman. He thought he had made a smart deal, but fate does not forgive betrayal. Years later, Celeste returns, not only healed but richer and more powerful than he ever imagined, and now it was Alaric's turn to feel the weight of his choices. Want to find out what happened next? Then click on the video appearing on your screen now and see it all unfold. I'll see you there.